two things you need to know is one, local governments have to find a statute in order to do what they want to do. But the second thing you need to know is that the General Assembly has created lots of statutes that give our local governments power to encourage and support affordable housing development. So the question that our panel is addressing today is how can local governments use their authority to encourage the development of affordable housing for low and moderate income persons. Now, there's one way we're not going to discuss, and that's the purely public approach. That's where a local government simply builds and owns and manages its own housing. That's what housing authorities do. Cities in North Carolina are allowed to go ahead and act like housing authorities if they want to. They can build their own housing, manage it for affordable housing. They can do that. But this panel, the programs we're going to discuss today, actually looks at how you can encourage private sector development of affordable housing. Now, anytime you work in a public-private partnership like that, where the public sector is trying to get the private sector to do what it wants, that is tricky, and it takes sophistication, and you'll see that the programs that our panelists will discuss today reflect that sophistication that is required. Now, the powers that these folks are going to talk to you about, the things that they're using are twofold. First, they're using a local government's power to contract and spend money. So the ability, in other words, to contract with a private developer to get that developer to construct affordable housing for low and moderate incomes. The second power is the ability to regulate land use, also known as a zoning power. And so, while Jeff's program is going to discuss how to contract and spend money to get private developers to do what you want, Cindy and Karen will be talking about using the regulatory power, land use, zoning. In case of Cindy, she's going to discuss Davidson's mandatory inclusionary zoning power, and Karen will discuss a policy that's being proposed and discussed in Durham, which involves a voluntary density bonus for private developers who construct affordable housing. Now, I have uploaded a few blog posts that I've written on these local government powers. They are on the conference website. You can also go to the School of Government's blog about community and economic development, where my posts are published. So you can either go to the conference website or go to the blog on community economic development in North Carolina, and you can read about these local government powers, the ones I've just discussed. I don't want to get into a legal discussion. I could spend the rest of the session talking about the law, but I won't. I want to let our panelists take it away from here. So Jeff, if you would, please get us started.
Thank you, Tyler, and so glad to be in here and be able to talk to you about one of the tools that the City of Asheville is using to encourage the private sector to develop affordable housing. So I'll have three basic topics. One is the policy direction. So what's the context within the City of Asheville from a policy direction that had our City Council move towards adoption of our current policy? The land use incentive program, so what does it look like? How does it work? And then a couple examples of how we are putting it into practice today. First, the City of Asheville is a very successful city in many ways. It is growing rapidly. It has a significant amount of development interest in the community. Hotel rooms, lots and lots of hotel rooms being built in the City of Asheville. It is a tourism-based economy and has the problem of a lot of people really wanting to come and be there and live there, and relative to the cost of living there, relatively low wages. This led to a significant deficit in housing in general, an anticipated growth of 10,000 households between 2015 and 2020, which for a city of 90,000 is a fairly significant pattern of growth, and a housing deficit for households earning less than 120% of median income of about 5,000 units today. So I could talk about all the other indicators, but in the interest of time, just know that our city council is determined, in conjunction with the private sector, interestingly, our Chamber of Commerce also embraces this. So we have a housing supply crisis. So the Asheville City Council, in looking at this, decided to lay a policy context on how we would address that. And that's the major pieces of that are in front of you. Each one of these has a particular strategy or a set of strategies that accompany this. And it does include a local housing trust fund, capital improvement funds going towards housing, and a upcoming general obligation bond referendum that would be looking at investing $25 million in affordable housing. But today I'm going to talk about the land use incentive grant as one very specific policy as a part of this. So the land use incentive grant was first proposed and became enacted as an ordinance in 2010. So we've been experiencing this housing crisis for some period of time. But the context specifically of this was trying to encourage greater density throughout our city, and fix brownfields, encourage multi-use development, encourage multi-family development, encourage energy efficiency, and many other goals, all of which were laudable goals. But it was a very complicated program at its early stages, and has been through a number of iterations as it's worked its way basically to clearly an affordable housing supply creation incentive program. So I want to be clear about that. It is having its most success today in its simplest iteration in the last 6 years, because we've been able to hone in on what our major needs are, and that is the development of affordable housing in our community. And it is structured very much like a tax increment financing program. Some of you are sure familiar with tax increment financing programs. You take the property value prior to development with a certain amount of tax obligation, property value post-development with an increased tax obligation, and you use that difference as a finance mechanism. This is not a statutory authorized tax increment financing program, so it's what is often known as a synthetic TIF, where we do not actually rebate taxes, but we create a grant program that is equal to the amount of taxes that is that tax increment, the difference between the value of the property prior to development of the property and the value post-development. And we incent based upon the percentage of affordable housing, primarily the percentage of affordable housing that is being developed and will be affordable to households at 80% of median income for a period of no less than 15 years. This is the basic structure. We also have an incentive that is essentially a grant. It's a rebate of the building permit fees that the city of Asheville charges in order to be able to do that development. So in order to qualify, at least 10% of the units must be affordable to households earning 80% or less of median income, must be affordable to and lease to eligible households for at least a 15-year period. And it must be convenient, and we let the developer define that and have interesting discussions about what convenience means to jobs, schools, and services in our community. So this is how the current point system works. So you can see that minimally, with each 10% equaling a grant of 1 year of property taxes, City of Asheville taxes, and by the way, this not includes county taxes, so it's city of taxes only. 10% affordable gives you a minimum of 2 years of grant of the differential property tax. And then you can see that if you are providing 90% of the units is affordable, you would have 10 years of property tax, each 10 points equaling a year of property tax grant. We also make an allowance for workforce housing. Workforce housing defined as housing affordable to households at 100% of median income. And by the way, we took that down, again, as this has been tweaked, from 120% of median income, which was our original definition, because we discovered that housing at 120% of median income is essentially market housing in our community. We also created some locational efficiency standards. You can see them there. And we've also increased the number of points for tenant affordability. So if you're going to make it affordable for 20 years, you get additional points, and if you're going to make it affordable for 30 years, you get a significant number of additional points. So in its structure, relatively simple. It is a performance-based program. It's a performance-based program that is enforced through a deed restriction on the property. And so it becomes a transferable restriction no matter who owns the property is being developed. And clearly, I suppose self-explanatory, it's a rental housing development program. So let's give a couple examples of what this looks like in our community. These are developments which either have been fully approved and have signed agreements, or are in the pathway to approval. Next one before City Council is October 25th, just to give you a sense of how this is working. This first one is Smith Mill Place. This is a 72-unit development, of which 36% of the units are going to be affordable to households at 60% of median income. It is also subsidized through our Housing Trust Fund to the tune of $520,000. And it qualified for a land use incentive grant of 9.5 years. To just go back up a little bit and show you how that worked. So as you can see, at 50% affordable, it is qualifying at 60 points for affordable to low and moderate income households. Excuse me? Oh, I got laser pointer. Can I work with laser pointer? I don't know if I can work with it. Here we go. So we can see at 50% affordable, we get, if I'm at the right, we have 60 points. If we add that the remainder of the units are workforce, okay, so 50% are workforce, we have 70 points. It's located within a half mile of transit. We have 80 points. It's in a half mile to a job center. We have 85 points. It is located a half mile from a transportation amenity. No, excuse me, you only get one or the other. And it is affordable for 20 years. You get 95 points, 9.5 years of tax incentive grant, 95% of City of Asheville permit fees granted and rebated. It also received conditional zoning for increased density. Affordable housing units were not a part of that conditional zoning approval. So a very highly incentivized program, which, by the way, on a per unit basis works out to about $15,000 of incentive per unit for 36 units that will be affordable to households at 60% of median income for 20 years, and 36 units that will be affordable to households at 100% of median income for 20 years. Already been through the scoring system, so we understand how that worked. Let's look at the next one. It's called Skyland Exchange. Skyland Exchange is a 290 unit development, of which 10% of the units are going to be affordable at 80% or less of median income. It is located in a very fast-growing, more suburban location in Asheville, a little bit less than 2 miles from Biltmore Park, which, as some of you may know, is a planned development that is a mixed residential, commercial development that was built new from the ground a few years ago. Total estimated development cost, $32 million. And it got conditional zoning for reduced tree coverage and setback. So at the 20 points for 10% affordable, and 10 points for superior location being actually with a pathway walking distance to the local school, and no points otherwise, it qualified for 3 years of tax grant. Those 3 years of tax grant are going to give the project a subsidy for those 29 units of, again, about $15,000 per unit. So we see how this works. I thought I had one more on here, but apparently it didn't come on here. But that gives you a basic idea of how it works. It is being actively implemented. There are more applications in the pipeline. I will tell you that this program is appealing to our private sector development community. And again, I'm glad to talk to anybody about how this works or give more references to this when our session's over today. Great.
Good morning. I'm Karen Lado. I'm a consultant based in Durham, and I'm here talking about some work I'm doing as part of a team from Enterprise Community Partners with the where we have been engaged by the City of Durham to help them develop an affordable housing strategy, and now to help them really execute on that affordable housing strategy. So as Tyler noted, what I'm going to talk about here is something that is in discussion, but is not yet fully baked. So you're going to see that on some of the key points, we're going to be silent because we haven't figured it out yet. So what our problem is, and as many of you understand, Durham is experiencing very rapid population growth, a rapid escalation in housing prices, and a loss of naturally occurring affordable housing, particularly in central neighborhoods and other areas that have become very attractive for development. And so it raised the question of, is there a way that we can take advantage of this market interest to incent market rate developers to build affordable housing, to provide affordable units? And I will say this, nationally, the track record of incentives for market rate developers for affordable housing is not real positive. It's kind of hard to get there. So we really are, but we have a particular opportunity in Durham that makes us think that maybe we can get there. And that is by creating what we're calling an enhanced density bonus in areas that would otherwise be legislatively upzoned. Let me tell you what I mean. So Durham and Orange County voters approved funding for a light rail corridor that would connect Durham and Orange County, Chapel in particular. And it has, I forget how many stops in Durham, 11 or 12, that are all areas that the city is moving towards upzoning to what they call compact districts, which is a more intensive use, really multifamily, perhaps townhome as the lowest possible density, mix of uses, but they haven't done it yet. But there is extensive market interest in a number of these station areas, even without the light rail line being built, just because of other things that are happening, which is good because the light rail line is complicated by the financing challenges of the line. So the opportunity we have is the current permitted densities in these station areas range between 2 and 20 units per acre. And this is excluding downtown and 9th Street, which have already been rezoned essentially to this compact district zoning. 9th Street, by the way, is an area near Duke, for those of you who are not familiar, and it's a very kind of student-oriented area. But what we see is that in those more urban areas that are higher density mix of uses, that the market maximum density that we're seeing is the maximum for stick-built construction. So it's basically 50, 60 units per acre, equivalent to about 4 to 5 stories on a podium. We have one project downtown that's kind of going above that and really going to a higher cost construction, but we're really working and thinking right now about what that increment is between the base zoning and the maximum for stick construction. So the idea behind the enhanced density bonus is that it would allow the developer to go from what is the existing underlying density, whether that's 2 units per acre or 20 units per acre, to what the kind of the market wants to build, that 50 to 60 units per acre. And the bonus would be available to developers who agree to set aside a specific percentage of the units as affordable for a set period of time. The goal is to create a program that would be voluntary and predictable. Voluntary in the sense that the developer could choose to build at the existing permitted density, or to build at a higher density and include affordable units. And what they have to include would be very clear and set out. What the rules of the game are would be very transparent up front. And as you might expect, the projects would need to meet all of the other zoning requirements in the compact district, beyond the affordable housing requirements. So here's some of the issues that we're having to work our way through. The first is, how do we calibrate this bonus? And this perhaps is the most complex piece, because for this to work, the economic benefit to the developer of the increased density has to be greater than the cost of providing the affordable units. Otherwise, they won't use it. And that's been the legacy of density bonus, or the history of density bonuses in most communities. Simply, people don't use them because it doesn't offset the cost. It's not enough to offset the cost. And so that's going to require financial modeling to really figure out what that percentage that we could require and at what AMI level will work. The second thing is that not all station areas are created equal. There are some station areas where we may not see development for a while. There's a lot of complications. There's a couple of other areas that are much more ripe for something to happen. So we need to think through, do we have different standards for different station areas? Or do we just go with a standard that we think will work with the ones that are most likely to go somewhere, and adapt it as we go on in time? Potential unintended consequences. We can only apply this to residential construction. So do we run the risk of pushing development near station areas towards commercial? I mean, obviously there is an upper limit on how much commercial the market can have, so it can't be an infinite push, but it is, again, something we need to think through. If a program goes forward, the city needs to think through, how are they going to administer the cost? How are they going to do things like income certify and annually, and make sure that the units are being leased and to qualified households. And finally, and this really is a bigger discussion, not all neighborhoods are thrilled at the idea of the increase in density that is going to come with the transit, not even with this. I mean, we're just taking advantage of the density that will happen with the rezoning. But that, adding affordable housing into the mix isn't going to make it easier to get this through, as we all know. So where are we at? We are about, estimates 2 to 5 years from actually putting permanent new zoning into place in these station areas. Right now they've been kind of rezoned, or they've been indicated on the future land use map that they're going to be this new zoning. So the idea is that the city would put in place an interim density bonus to bridge this gap that would apply to the existing underlying zoning. And that once we actually rezone the compact district, assuming it's worked, we'll build this density bonus into that new compact district zoning. We are very much at the stage of, okay, we've got the concept, but we really need to sit down and do the financial modeling, do developer consultation, talk to the community, because this is an idea that has been pushed very actively by the advocacy community, to really to figure out what will work. It's very easy to say we should do 15% at 60% of our median income, but if the numbers don't work, we're not going to get what we want. And the worst possible outcome for the city is that development happens at low densities around the station areas, because then it's there and we have these stations coming in and we have 10 units per acre instead of 50. And finally, once we get there, both the interim proposal and the final land use changes will need to be approved by both the city and the county, particularly as the station runs in the city and the county, and the planning department in Durham is a shared city-county planning department. So this work is, this work is being primarily carried by the planning department in the city of Durham, and they are very much at early stages of the process.
All right, thank you, Karen. We are going to have a question and answer session, and I'll ask Samuel to station some microphones around. But just while you are thinking of your questions for the panel, I want to start with one, and that is this question of how do you ensure that the developer or the future owner is going to maintain the affordability of the house. So Cindy, you mentioned using deed restrictions. I'd like to know whether those are effective, and Jeff, I'd like to know what you all are doing in Asheville to make sure there's enforceability, and then Karen, if you could let us know what you're recommending. So Jeff, if you could start by letting us know what's Asheville using in order to ensure that units remain affordable.
We are establishing and having the developers sign a deed restriction. But that is of course the first part of the process. We actually do enter into an agreement. I will note that the actual value of that land use incentive grant isn't actually known until the development is completed. When the actual difference in value will be determined by the county tax assessor when the final values or when the project is complete and it's gotten its CO. We'll then know what that difference is. We will know what the permit fees are, but again, at the time of approval, it's a little bit unpredictable. We will then monitor through our community development division on an annual basis. The developer will be required to maintain both rent rolls and income information for the tenants in the affordable units. We will not ask to have that submitted to us at each turnover. And we are not requiring the developer, unlike a tax credit project, we are not requiring an annual evaluation of that tenant's income, not trying to displace anyone or necessarily have rents increase for households. We're not trying to create that barrier. But we are saying at the time of turn of an affordable unit, a unit must become affordable we're saying right now, within a 3-month time frame. If market demand would change in our community and we would have a situation where there would be, I don't think it's predictable that would happen at all, but a loss of tenants, we could negotiate at a different time frame. The developers have asked, both in our conditional zoning units, which are also created, affordable units being created through our regulatory process, and through a density bonus, not dissimilar in concept to what Durham has. How do they recruit affordable tenants? And you can see in a project like Skyland Exchange, which is 290 market units with 29 units that are affordable. A tenant looking for affordable housing may not naturally go there thinking that there would be an affordable unit available. We are asking them to market through our 211 process, and also, if they'd like to, through the statewide rental housing website. They are finding, we've had actually some projects on the ground where this has happened. They're advertising for 211. They are finding qualified tenants, no problem. The other thing that we're not doing, and there has been some discussion with advocates about this, is we are also not requiring the landlord to change their credit requirements or their landlord reference requirements or other qualifications that they would typically use. So typically they will have well-qualified working tenants occupying these units. We have other programs in place that we're seeking to make sure that a broader diversity of people in our community who need housing, and we all know that family circumstances differ in many, many ways. We're trying to find other ways to house those folks who may not qualify, whether for tax credit developments or for a typical private sector development. We are encouraging the use of vouchers, and we're also using that as a marketing program and as a monitoring program. And so we're saying if a developer is housing a voucher tenant at the fair market rent, that qualifies as a 60% rent. And so that allows the developer taking a voucher to actually get a boost and a certain level of assurity that that rent will be paid, because that fair market rent is somewhere between a 60 and an 80% rent, just using your typical 30% of gross income divided by 12 as your standard for creating that affordability. So again, monitored annually, date certain, in written agreement, and further restricted through a deed restriction.